So hello and welcome to our panel discussion today, Planting Deep Roots to Withstand the Winds of Change. My name is Valerie Lumbrano, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. I'm a senior manager with EY in our federal enterprise risk management engagements and in our government and public sector practice. And I'm joined by three esteemed colleagues and leaders in the industry to guide our thinking on this topic, and I'll let them introduce themselves to tell you a little bit about who they are. Marianne, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Hi, I'm Marianne Roth. I'm the Chief Risk Officer at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I'm very happy to announce that this month, actually July 21st, is the 10th anniversary of the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And we are a federal government agency that helps make sure that banks, lenders, and other financial companies treat consumers fairly. We were created in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis so that we could provide a single point of accountability for enforcing federal consumer financial laws and protecting consumers in the financial marketplace. Some of our work includes rooting out unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices by writing rules, supervising companies, and enforcing the law. We also enforce laws that outlaw discrimination in consumer finance. We take in consumer complaints so that consumers have a single place to go to report companies that are not treating them fairly. We provide financial education so that individuals can have the information, steps, and tools that they need to make smart financial decisions. And we research various consumer financial products and monitor the markets to identify new risks for consumers. In my role as the Chief Risk Officer, I'm responsible for improving leadership decision-making by implementing enterprise risk management, which is an agency-wide approach to addressing the full spectrum of risks facing an organization and considering how to address those risks across the portfolio rather than in silos. So what that means on a day-to-day basis is that I'm responsible for creating the governance structures and processes to enable all the risks facing the Bureau to be identified, assessed, and responded to. And I also provide various change leadership initiative facilitation for our Bureau senior leadership. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at today's presentation.
Really happy to have you, Marianne. Meredith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, Valerie. My name is Meredith Stein. I work at the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. I lead the Office of Management Assessment, and this office is essentially the Chief Accountability and Compliance Office for NIH. My team leads agency-wide programs that set policy and perform oversight. The NIH is the nation's medical research agency, supporting scientific discoveries that turn discovery into health. NIH's mission is to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. In total, NIH invests $42 billion annually and provides more than 80% of that funding through awards of competitive grants to 300,000 researchers at more than 2,500 universities, medical schools, and other research institutions in every state and nation around the world. NIH also conducts its in-house research and has the largest clinical research hospital in the world. About 10% of NIH's budget and nearly 6,000 scientists study in our own labs, most of which are on campus in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Meredith. We're happy to have you. Nicole, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Good morning, and thank you, Valerie, for that introduction. So my name is Nicole Puri, and I am the Chief Risk Officer for the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. Fiscal Service is a component of the Department of Treasury, and as such, we have a very operational mission, and so that really colors a lot of what we do, which we'll get into a little bit later as well. Some things that you might not know about the Bureau is that we make 87% of federal payments. So that's quite a large chunk. I think one of the major exceptions is DoD, but otherwise we make quite a few of those payments. We do a lot of collections, such as student loan debt and things like that across the government for other agencies as a service. And we provide other financial management services to our clients, which are other federal agencies. We have some other services as well, but as you can tell, kind of getting things done is what we do. And So look forward to talking a little bit more today about, how we've initiated some change management programs at our agency.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Really happy to have you. So our goal today is to understand ways we can effectively manage through change in order to embed the benefits into the fabric of our organization. So to set the stage for our conversation today, my first question is for all of you. We know that our people are our most valuable asset. So how do you incorporate a people-centric approach to your leadership style and organizational objectives around change management? So Nicole, let's start with you.
So, I think my approach has really been significantly impacted by the agency where I work, right? So I was saying that we're a very operational agency. That's one of the unique things about us. But we're also unusual in another way, which is that we have a very large presence in a very small city in West Virginia, and a smaller presence in the Washington, D.C. area. So the reason why that's important is because we're a major employer in a small town. And so as a result, that means that we really have lower than normal turnover, and people tend to stay a long time at the agency, sometimes their entire career. So we have to be people focused just because of the nature of our workforce. We can't always go out and hire someone with a specific skill set that we need. And I think also, our planning, sometimes when we're planning for the future and thinking about what needs we have for new skill sets or for numbers of people and things like that, it can be challenging because, again, we're not just, recruiting and hiring. We also have to think about retraining our existing employees and what skills they have currently that might need to be retrained, and also whether they're willing to be retrained. And so that poses some unique challenges, but it's also, I think, an opportunity. So at any rate, I think as a result, what we end up doing, and again, this influenced my personal approach as well, is we spend more time thinking about utilizing those existing skill sets and really looking for opportunities for our people to do details, to grow their skill sets, to work in other areas. And so that cross-training and kind of broad approach is very important. And it's very common in the agency for people to move from job to job, right? So they may work in 4 or 5 different program areas in the Bureau during a lifetime career, or even just in a couple of years. And that, like I said, that can be a great way to cross-train people and really give them opportunities to learn and excel as well. So since I have a very small team, my approach has really changed to that of recruiting from within for support and talent whenever I can, looking for opportunities to bring existing employees kind of into the universe of performance and risk management, which is where I spend most of my time, and embracing the long-term nature of fiscal service employment by taking time to learn from those who have spent an entire career here or many, many years, and who have worked in so many different positions that they really have a unique and valuable perspective to share. And so I found that to be an effective strategy to rolling out ERM, which is what I do, and the changes that are coming along with the program advancement that we're working on to the whole organization.
Really helpful perspective to share, Nicole. I appreciate it. Meredith, how do you take a people-centric approach at NIH?
I'll share one of my favorite quotes from Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care." I approach relationships and interactions in a supportive, empathetic manner, taking a people-centric approach to implementing programs and managing change. Certainly, the COVID pandemic turned the world upside down. Everyone at NIH began working from home, while employees were trying to cope with fear and anxiety, changing daily routines, and a sense of uncertainty. I believe employees are engaged when they feel trusted to make decisions and achieve program outcomes. Certainly, we all saw that remote work requires trust. Leaders at NIH assumed the positive intent and trusted employees, even though we could not see them physically. NIH leadership recognized the different and difficult conditions in which employees were operating. Employees had a fear of contracting COVID-19. They're caring for sick relatives or parents juggling their jobs while also tending to their children. The sincere message from leadership, that tone at the top that we all seek when implementing programs and managing change, is flexibility. Leaders emphasize and continue to communicate agencies' flexible workplace policies. and leadership is so respectful and nimble to support employees. An NIH component is the National Institute of Mental Health, where there's research about well-being and mental health. And certainly we all saw the pandemic raise awareness of mental health symptoms and service needs. NIH takes very seriously the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and pays attention to the overall score for employee engagement. This also emphasizes that people-centric approach. The survey has questions about how supervisors listen to what employees have to say, treat employees with respect, and support the employees' need to balance work and life issues. I believe that there's a strong correlation between the supervisor's effective communications and employee engagement. NIH employees are engaged because of leadership's commitment to the employee's sense of purpose, their effort in their work, and their dedication to our special agency mission.
Thanks so much for sharing, Meredith. Marianne, would you like to share how you take a people-centric approach at CFPB?
Sure, happy to. I agree with everything that Nicole and Meredith have said. And so I want to talk a little bit about my approach from a small team perspective and how I manage my team. So as a leader, I think it's very important for employees to have a connection to the mission and the vision of the organization. So I invest a lot of time in explaining how what they do on a day-to-day basis reflects and supports the Bureau's mission and objectives. Specifically for the ERM program, I talk about how it relates to our strategic goals, like how we're using this approach to ensure that the Bureau is effectively protecting consumers and that we're addressing changes in the markets on as close to real-time basis as we can. And I explain like how their individual day-to-day work contributes to that. I also set specific metrics and priorities for my employees to achieve. And I think that this really helps improve our performance as a team, but it also provides a sense of accomplishment for our team members. They can track their own progress and see how they've had real-time impact against the Bureau's mission and objectives. I also think it's important to create a learning environment within a team. I strive to create an environment where my team feels like they can demonstrate and apply their knowledge and skills and feel a sense of fulfillment and accomplishment from their contributions to the team environment. Because the Bureau is a small organization and I have a very small team, I typically have to pull in detailees or rotational employees to help me implement ERM. And so they come to the table with no understanding of what ERM is. And so I try to create an environment in which they can learn about ERM, through standard materials, but also so that I can tailor it to their specific needs and experiences. So I encourage them to ask questions and challenge assumptions. And for me, this is a real benefit because it reinforces the need for ongoing communication and coaching, but it also helps me understand how we need to constantly adapt our ERM program to meet the changing needs of our organization. I also encourage them to attend various briefings across the Bureau and stay up to date on what's happening within the Bureau, but also within the larger financial market. And finally, I try to seek input from within the team and outside of my team on a regular basis. I deeply value the perspectives and insights of my team members. And so my leadership style is really to ask them on a regular basis what issues they see from their vantage point that could impact our work and solicit their thoughts on what we can do to make sure that we're keeping things on track. I also regularly meet with leaders across the Bureau so that we keep those lines of communication open, but also so that I can get their feedback on how things are going and if they're getting the value out of our ERM program that they desire. And I think that the combination of connecting the work to the mission, creating a learning environment, and fostering communication across the organization are the essential building blocks to establishing a people-centric approach to leadership.
Thanks, Marianne. Appreciate you sharing that holistic approach. Staying with you for a second and thinking about CFPB's mission, CFPB has taken some really important steps to execute their mission through the lens of racial equity and social justice. Can you talk about how you think about incorporating diversity into your approach to organizational excellence as well?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So when I joined the Bureau, I had to build the ERM program from the ground up. That we had nothing in place. And so I had the opportunity to create an early partnership with our Office of Equal Opportunity and Fairness. And CFPB is a little bit unique. Some financial regulators have the same requirement, but we are required by statute to have an office called the Office for Women and Minority Inclusion. And that office has both an internal and an external diversity and inclusion focus. So from an external perspective, they ensure that companies are, the companies that we regulate are addressing the concerns of women and minorities, and they have that the representation of women and minorities within their own governance structure. From an internal perspective, OMWI is focused on ensuring that the Bureau is reflecting the diversity of our country in our hiring practices and in our leadership ranks. So I really wanted to build a D&I perspective, a diversity inclusion perspective, into our ERM program. And I wanted it to develop and mature organically so that it would be perceived as just a part of the way the Bureau approaches enterprise risk management and not a compliance activity. Some people in the organization were questioning, why did I focus on so much on diversity and inclusion in starting up our ERM program? But many studies have shown that diversity and inclusion, companies with a more diverse and inclusive workforce are much more effective. They can drive innovation, they achieve their objectives more than other teams, and they're able to solve problems faster than cognitively similar teams. So from an ERM perspective, I specifically built in diversity and inclusion elements of the ERM program so that we can better identify risks and opportunities, so that we can overcome groupthink, resulting in more accurate and effective risk assessments and scenario analyses, and also building trust across the organization. But we also have taken a broader perspective on diversity and inclusion under Acting Director Waggio. He has made his priorities very clear that serving traditionally underserved communities and focusing on racial and economic justice and inequities is a primary component of the Bureau. And so we have been working to specifically look at how the Bureau addresses diversity and inclusion and better protects consumers, particularly in traditionally underserved communities, and what the specific risks of consumer harm are for those communities. And that's a very different approach than the Bureau has taken in the past. So recently I led an initiative to identify and assess what those risks are for traditionally underserved communities within the scope of the Bureau. So we looked at how there was discrimination in mortgage servicing or in credit cards and auto loans and credit reporting and debt collection. And then we developed specific mitigation plans so that the Bureau can better address the needs of those groups of consumers. And currently I am working with Bureau leaders to determine how we can best measure the impact of the Bureau's work, particularly focusing on racial and economic equity issues. So we want to make sure that our work is having the intended impacts and that we're doing the most that we possibly can to help protect the most vulnerable consumers in our country.
It's really leading practice and exciting work that you're doing there. I appreciate you sharing. Meredith, would you be able to share how you and NIH are thinking about diversity in your organizational approach?
Absolutely, and to hone in on Marianne's approach, so smart to look for ways to incorporate and promote equity in the Bureau's programs. I agree 100% with Marianne's words of wisdom. As a science agency, NIH also knows that bringing diverse perspectives and backgrounds and skill sets to help solve scientific problems enhances productivity. The events of 2020 highlighted the reality of our nation's racial injustices that significantly disadvantage the lives of so many. And NIH has launched an effort to end structural racism and racial inequities in biomedical research through a new initiative called Unite. Each letter in the word Unite stands for a committee that aims to establish an equitable and civil culture within the biomedical research enterprise and figure out ways to reduce barriers to racial equity in the biomedical research workforce. So the letter U stands for understanding stakeholder experiences through listening and learning. The N stands for new research on health disparities, minority health, and health equity. The I in Unite stands for improving the NIH culture for structure for equity, inclusion, and excellence. The T stands for transparency, communication, accountability with our internal and external stakeholders. And finally, the E stands for extramural research ecosystem. The extramural program relates to our grantee community, where we're looking to find ways to change policy, culture, and the structure to promote workforce diversity. We're facilitating research to identify opportunities, make recommendations, and develop and implement strategies to increase inclusivity and diversity in science. We are so committed to instituting new ways to support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and figure out ways to identify and dismantle any policies and practices that may harm our workforce and our science. Because what Marianne said rings true. Diversification fuels our creativity and drives innovation, and that's how we can achieve our agency missions.
Thanks for sharing, Meredith. And I love the elegance of Unite as a way to bring everybody together in really important areas. Circling back on something you had mentioned before and thinking about our people, we've certainly been put to the test over the last year and a half, and resiliency has come to the forefront. When you think about organizational resiliency, what does that mean to you, Meredith, and what does that mean to NIH?
I love this term, organizational resilience. I think it's the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare, respond, and adapt, similar to the phases of a risk management cycle, but everything from minor everyday events to sudden shocks and chronic changes in the environment. And every agency experienced this when the COVID crisis and lockdown began last March. For me, resilience is about a growth mindset. The opposite of what researchers call a growth mindset is a fixed mindset. So under a fixed mindset, people could be caught in proving our traits to ourselves or others. We could ask questions of ourselves like, how can I demonstrate my ability, or how can I avoid mistakes? Whereas the growth mindset, or that resilience lens, people have the belief that positive and negative experiences will lead to learning and growth. They'll ask themselves questions like, how can I improve? Or what can I learn from this? I think the same would be true when senior leadership shows that tone at the top of a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. If the organization takes a learning and growth approach organically, I think it will have a strong organizational resilience to sustain and achieve its mission.
That's really helpful. I love thinking about things in that growth mindset perspective. Nicole, how do you think about organizational resiliency at the Bureau of Fiscal Service?
Yeah, well, Val, as I mentioned earlier, fiscal service is an operational agency. We're much less policy and much more about, as we like to say, getting things done. So I wanted to also kind of use the work that we did during the pandemic as an example here, because I think it's, everyone went through it, so we get it. I think the bottom line for fiscal service during the pandemic was, hey, the work doesn't stop or even really get delayed, right? We have to plow through. And so resiliency, therefore, for us was, how do we keep that high level of operational efficiency and results that we're so used to while deploying kind of new and old technologies? And I use old and new technologies, old not to mean that they are no longer in use, but things that we had pre-pandemic, right, that were kind of already there. And I will say, I think we were probably, behind some agencies and ahead of some agencies in terms of how advanced our technology was. But it was good enough that it really allowed us to keep up and work remotely very effectively. But then also as time went on and we kind of saw what our needs were, not only to continue to operate at the same level, but really to prosper from working in a remote environment, Then we started to look at how to deploy new technologies, like ways to collaborate remotely through Teams, right? Not just to have maybe a visual component, but to actually collaborate using some of those online tools that we have. So I think that when I think about organizational resiliency, honestly, the technology really made a big difference. And I think the Bureau's ability to focus on getting technology solutions that worked for people, that worked for the type of work that we do and needed to get done, and to, again, achieve that operational effectiveness and efficiency that we strive for, and supported our productivity both before and during the pandemic, was key to things going as smoothly as they did. So, but I kind of agree with Meredith that it's not really, resiliency should be also about moving forward, right? Learning from things that happened and getting beyond kind of the fixed mindset. So for us, what that meant was, hey, so people have to implement all of this stuff, right? And have to deal with the problems as they come up, right? I mean, no one's perfect. We didn't get it all right the first time around, although we did pretty well. But what I think really took us to that next level, and I think proved that we do have excellent organizational resiliency, is that the leadership of the agency really worked to provide those opportunities for feedback and improvement during the pandemic. They took it very seriously when employees expressed concerns. They listened to what people had to say, which doesn't always happen everywhere. And so I think that sort of commitment to employees really shines through when it's there and accounts for a lot of our success and our ability to be resilient and to make those decisions that were needed to kind of take us to that next level.
Having that continuous improvement loop is so valuable for organizations. And one of the drivers we've seen for the need for resiliency in the first place is often risk, in particular risks associated with change. So Nicole, can you talk to us about how you frame your thinking about risks with regards to change initiatives?
Sure. So of course, working in risk, I tend to use a risk-based approach anytime I start a change initiative, which I've done several times, probably the last 6-7 years. And so what I think about is how has the organization dealt with change before? Were there maybe certain speed bumps that derailed progress? And if so, how can we plan for those? Look at the success stories and the things that did work, and try to adjust our approach to utilize those effective strategies. And really plan ahead of time is key, right? I think the timing is important, but generally speaking, you don't want to wait too long. You want to plan in advance. So some of the other things that I think about are, who needs to buy into the change, right? What's going to get them interested in the change? Can this change that we're trying to put forward support something that the agency leadership is trying to accomplish, or something that they think is important? And so as I think through all of this, one of the ways that I kind of put it all together is I want to plan for something that's going to deliver results at the end of the day. That also is one of those aspects of change management that I think really can get people on board, is when you can show that I can deliver results here as a result of this effort. I think, we work in agencies and we recognize it takes a long time and it can be really hard to change things. And so if you can focus even on showing small results over time, that can be very effective. And so as I think about, okay, well, what do I need to do to be able to show results? I think you need to have both a baseline to measure from and some sort of path or framework to follow, right? So that people can see, okay, this is where we started, this is where we're going, and this is how we're going to know when we've gotten there and we've actually achieved some results. And it's challenging and a lot of work, but it's a very effective way I have found to implement change management. So I think, risk comes into organizational change in a lot of ways. If you don't plan for it properly, if you don't deliver results, if you don't get the right buy-in, or if you don't follow through with the plan, all of those are risks that can derail success and also, by the way, cause a resiliency problem.
I like the tie back. That's really helpful. And the framework, the way you've laid it out, is really a useful way to kind of think about all the steps and buy-in that you might need. Marianne, how do you think about framing risks with regard to change at CFPB?
Sure. So Like Nicole, I usually take a risk-based approach to everything that I do. And although it may feel like I'm leading a lot of change initiatives at the Bureau, very often they are being led by others at the Bureau. And so I really try to focus on how can I make a risk-based approach more accessible and more integrated into the way others think about how they're planning and implementing their change initiatives. So in terms of building risk into planning efforts, rather than coming in with a laundry list of risk terms that may not be familiar to people, I try to put things in language that they currently use in their projects and focus on helping them think through what are the potential challenges that they will face in their planning efforts. What are the potential challenges they'll face when they get to an implementation phase? And how do they want to address those challenges? Are those challenges that they are willing to accept and that they don't need to implement a mitigation strategy for, or are there things that they need to start planning for to address now so that they can have a successful change initiative? I also help them think about what are the trade-offs that they need to consider when they're making recommendations to leadership. As every federal agency does, we have a finite amount of resources available, both in terms of budget and people. And I think that having those focused discussions on what is really the top priority here and how are we best addressing it and what are the impacts, both in the short term, the medium term, and the long term of a particular course of action is really important for change leaders to think about and to present to leadership so that leaders can make the best decisions for their organization. And then finally, at the Bureau, being a young agency, we've moved from being a startup agency where everything was being built from the ground up to a more mature agency, although only 10 years old. And so I think that focus on ongoing maturity is very important. So I think that the risk of not building a risk-based approach into how the Bureau overall addresses its change initiatives is critical. And that we constantly need to think about how can we better deploy the skills and talents of our employees, how can we build and enhance those skills and talents, and how can we ensure that the Bureau has this longer term focus on the ultimate objectives and impacts of its work.
I love the way you started too. There were so many helpful tidbits in there, and the way you started about meeting people where they are to really start the change conversation is a really valuable way to kind of smooth out the rest of the path that you laid out for us. So thank you for sharing. And as we wrap up today, we've really covered a lot of ground, the power of our people, leveraging diversity of thought to build our organizational resiliency, and thinking about risk as a conduit to embedding effective change. So for everyone, what closing thoughts or takeaways would you like to leave the audience with today? And Marianne, I'll start with you.
Sure. So as critical as it is to embed these elements that we've talked about into your program, into your team and your leadership style, it is hard work. It has to be intentionally done. You have to intentionally foster a diverse and inclusive environment and to intentionally think about how you can build risk into your organizational planning and change initiatives. It's definitely worth the work. The benefits outweigh any challenges you may face, but it is something intentional that you have to focus on. Some tips that have been helpful for me as I've progressed in my career is when you're in the midst of a change organization and you're building buy-in, don't be afraid of the tough questions you may receive from various stakeholders. I would really view those questions or issues that they raise as an opportunity. And so I encourage individuals to focus on the question itself and not who is asking it, and to explain and invest a lot of time in explaining again and again the why of what you're doing and how it directly relates to the staff's daily work and the mission of the organization. It's been said so many times before, but you really can't over communicate the importance of it. constantly embedding the buy-in and building buy-in for a change organization. So those are the tips that I've found helpful in my career.
I love it. Thank you. Meredith, how about you? Any closing thoughts or takeaways to leave us with?
Yes, yes. So I love listening to Dr. Brene Brown, who studies courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. Her 2010 TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability is one of the most viewed talks in the world. I'd offer that to learn more about resiliency, check out the research conducted by Dr. Carol Dweck about fixed and growth mindsets. One of my favorite podcasts is The Happiness Lab with Dr. Laurie Santos, who's a professor at Yale. In her podcast, Dr. Santos shares her research about stories to change the way we think of happiness. I think happiness and resilience go hand in hand. So I'll end on another favorite quote of mine about happiness. It's not happy people who are grateful, it's grateful people who are happy. Thank you, Valerie, Nicole, and Marianne for this discussion. I learned a lot.
Thanks, Meredith. I'll write down the tips you gave in the podcast. I'll have a lot of listening to do coming up. Nicole, how about you? Any closing thoughts and takeaways?
Yeah, no, I think the tips that we've just gotten from Marianne and Meredith are really, really awesome. So I will keep it very brief and just say that, kind of in summary for my remarks, organizational change and lack of resiliency, in addition to that, can cause a lot of chaos in an organization. I think we've probably all seen it, but it doesn't have to. And that's the real key and the takeaway that I'm getting from today's remarks. So even if you can only control your little corner of the world, good planning and using a risk-based approach that we've all talked about can help you focus on the elements that will have the most impact on the success of your change endeavor. And I would also like to thank the panel today. Valerie, thank you for moderating. Marianne, Meredith, thank you for participating. And I've enjoyed it as well.
Thank you so much. You guys were wonderful. I appreciate all of the insights and the leadership and experiences that you shared. If you're watching, thank you for spending your time with us today. And we hope you found this information valuable and informative. Hope everybody takes care and stay safe. Thanks so much.